Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's LUMIX Live. As promised, we have a very special guest with us for this week's broadcast, who's kind of laughing in the wings right now as I'm hyping him up here. Yeah, so we're continuing the video topic that we've been doing for the last 3 weeks here. And as the title says, we're going to be talking about some anamorphic stuff today, with basically like the LUMIX Anamorphic king in LUMIX here. And kind of talking about some of the cool things that we do in relation to anamorphic, but also going through, various topics like OpenGate and, probably talking also about, some of the image quality sides of various ways that we work with things like ProRes and stuff like that within the cameras. So lots to cover this week. If you have questions during the broadcast for either our guest or myself, make sure to tag at LUMIX USA and we will get to those questions. But before we jump into that, I want to remind everybody in the US about LUMIX Pro services. We have the Red and the Platinum tier available in the US. The Red tier is free, so if you have purchased a LUMIX camera and you have a brand new LUMIX camera, follow the QR code on the screen or the link down in the description. Get yourself registered. You're going to get your 3-year warranty out of that. Or if you're working professional, if you're someone who just likes to have that better peace of mind of having a more in-depth service and support side of your purchase, take a look at the Platinum series. That is a paid level service, but that's going to get you the 3-year manufacturer warranty extension. But on top of that, you're going to get things like 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways. You're going to get 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if you drop or break a lens, things like that, you'll be able to get those repaired and lessen the burden on your pocket. You'll also get access to annual sensor cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all the stuff that we know we have to do to our cameras, but sometimes we don't really have the time or the patience to want to do it. So you can send it in and get that stuff done by us. And you also get access to a membership hotline. So if you're someone who prefers to speak to people in person, you have access to that line. It's 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, East Coast U.S. time. So you get access to that as well. So if you're interested in those and you're in the U.S., either follow the QR code that's right below me or click the link down in the description. If you're not in the US, you can follow the global link that's down in the description below and see what is available within your region for their various versions of LUMIX Pro services. So, without further ado, let's bring in our guest. Hi, Matt. It's been a while.
Hey, Sean. Yeah, it's been a little bit. I take umbrage with being called special. I don't really know how special I am. But nevertheless, I'm glad to be on the call. And I did notice that sorry, I'm looking on my phone at the chat now. So Chips Lab is asking if I'll be at IBC. My warrants won't allow me to leave the country, so I'm not. So I'm. They don't send Sean or I to Europe. So I hope everybody's enjoying my kind of prison lighting setup I have here. Sean knows I've been working on some projects for like we were doing these things with volume photography. I'm having to shoot a bunch of how-to videos, and so my camera is currently like indisposed above me. So I basically I'm trying to like hide as much of my mess as I can right now in this framing going on.
Oh man. No, it's really good to have you back on these streams. I mean, I think it's funny, because like you and I chat so often as it sits, like almost on a daily basis. And like when
We're
I
work
start,
we're
yeah.
work spouse.
Oh
That's
yeah,
really
exactly. My wife constantly, anytime she's moving through the apartment, she's like, is that your work husband or work wife? It's like, yeah, it's Matt. It's fine. But yeah, like, so we've been having these conversations, and we're always talking about what everyone here on the chat is saying and stuff. And it was funny on the first one of the video topics that we did. I put there and I said, if you want to see Matt, drop a comment on the video after it's posted just with Matt's name, and it
yeah.
was just like inundated with Matt. So
But
the
most of those
internet
people,
loves you, man.
they don't know who I am. They just want to put it in there. So, all right. So let's enough about me. Why don't we go
Yeah,
ahead and talk about what the topics are today? So
yeah.
I'll let you guide, and I'll I'll interject when you want me to interject.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, we've been talking a lot about the various different, video functions and features and tools that we have within the Lumix cameras over the last couple of weeks, as many of the viewers know. And we got to the point now where I wanted to bring into the conversation about anamorphic, the various capabilities that we have within the cameras, and honestly, how it ties to the evolution of our open gate recording function. Something that is pretty near and dear to Matt and I's hearts about what this means to the video side of the industry and how it's expanding capabilities for everybody. So I think as a base level, I wanted to kind of take this moment to give those of you watching a brief overview of what we can do within our cameras for anyone that wants to capture anamorphic content. So I have my GH7 hooked up here so that we can talk about some of the menus. Now, as a caveat, when I start talking about some of these features, you're not going to see the changes over the HDMI feed that I have coming. These are things that you'll see on the camera itself. Unlike Matt, I don't have my overhead camera set up at this point, so I couldn't do a top-down. But when we talk about anamorphic, we're talking about, specific lenses. So I have one of them here, that we're going to talk about. This is a bit of an older anamorphic lens, I think, actually, because this is the Surrey 50mm f1.8. I forget which... I changed my lenses. So this is the Surrey 50mm f1.8, and this is a 133 anamorphic lens. So, Matt, could you explain a bit about what that means for anamorphic, the 133 or the 16 or 20, like that rating on the lenses?
Yeah. So let's back up just for a second.
Yeah.
So whenever we talk about anamorphic, I usually like to give just a little bit of history of why these things exist. And
Yeah.
The reality is that when we shot movies back in like the 20s and 30s and 40s, the film stock was the shape of like a 1990s television set. It was 4 inches wide for every 3 inches it was tall. It was in a 4:3 aspect ratio. And when these newfangled boxes were going into people's homes called television sets, people stopped going to movies. So they made the decision that they were going to try to make a more grand presentation. They wanted to have wider, more enveloping screens in the theaters. So there were a couple ways it could do this. You could either, crop the film stock to the wider aspect ratio and then kind of just blow it up. So it kind of reminds you of what we do today, right? When we crop a video image and turn it into a CinemaScope and then we kind of blow it up. You begin to see a lot more grain and noise, especially when, the screen is like 2.5 stories tall. So that was not the ideal way of doing it. So they took like old tank technology, actually. They took these anamorphic lenses, which squeeze and like stretch the image. So it makes everything look tall and skinny. And it puts it onto the film stock. And then when you would project it back out, you would put it through an anamorphic lens that was turned like 90 degrees. So when you turn it 90 degrees, it then de-squeezes and it would project it out. You get all the grain on that 4:3 film stock, but you get it in a wider aspect ratio. And so that's the reason that they existed. I realize in the digital world, this is like, why, who cares? I can just crop and do whatever I want. I've got a, 20K sensor now or whatever the resolutions are that you're capable of. I don't have to worry about grain. It's much more about the characteristics the lens introduces, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah. But I wanted people to understand the very basic concept, which is that the image is going to be squeezed and stretched as it's projected onto the sensor. So when you see like a 133, that means you're getting a 0.33 amount of squeeze, right? We're making the image 1.33 times skinnier than it is in reality. If we have a 1.5, it's going to be 1.5 times skinnier, which would make me look a lot better right now because apparently a little thick right now, so I got to lose some weight. But we can then go to like a 2x squeeze, which is for cinema has been the standard for decades, has been the 2x squeeze, the ability to bring things 2 times closer, and then you would de-squeeze it 2 times wider. That's what had been used for decades and decades. So when you see things like 133, that's that sort of squeeze ratio was really born right around the time of high definition TV, because you had like cameras that, people didn't want to buy a high def camera. They wanted to use just a regular definition 4:3 aspect ratio camera, but then they want to be able to fill the screen um, in 16:9. So you put a 133 sensor, sorry, 133 anamorphic lens on, and then that would squeeze it, and it would de-squeeze it when they do the broadcast. And that's what would give you that 16:9 aspect ratio. And so just a little history about what's going on there. I'm sure that most of the people on this meeting already know that, but just a
Yeah, and what I think is funny is that, like when you start talking about this, like at a base level, right? It's all about that squeezing for the various different formats. But when we actually look at like what we've gotten implemented within our cameras, if you go in and you want to actually look and see like the anamorphic de-squeeze options, look at how many you have within the camera. And I know, when you start looking at, what optic am I using, what lens am I using, what aspect ratio am I going to be recording in, these all have different relations to that end result piece of footage that you're going to capture. So in the example of the lens that I have here, the Sur 50, which is for the Micro Four Thirds mount one, and this is the original one that they had, this being a 133 anamorphic lens, what typically, and I think you've kind of answered this already, but this lens was typically designed for what aspect ratio of the camera to be recording in? It was a weird way to ask that question.
I mentioned earlier, because when you use a 133 on like a 4:3 aspect ratio sensor, that would get you very close to a 178:1, which is 16:9 aspect ratio. That's the standard high def aspect ratio. However, when we started getting into high def cameras, and then you started to get the DSLR revolution, people started discovering these 133 anamorphics. If you put them in 16:9, they would give you about a 236, 237 aspect ratio, which when we think of CinemaScope, people will they'll throw around like three numbers or three different combinations of numbers. You'll hear 2.35:1. That just means it's 2.35 inches wide for every inch it is tall. You'll also hear like 239 or 240:1. They're basically the same thing. So when you use that 133 on a 16:9 sensor, it gets you pretty close to that CinemaScope kind of classic look. Although I think it's kind of funny because that 240 and 239 and 235, that's really only in reference to like televisions. Because when we were putting this in the theater, you had like 220. If you look at like, oh God, I think it was I'm trying to remember which movie I'm talking about. Some of the original like CinemaScope projects were in 220 aspect ratios.
Yeah.
If you look at what Hateful Eight was, that was a 278:1 aspect ratio. So there's a lot of sort of fudging at the theater as to what they're going to do versus what we'll usually see at home once it's all been encoded onto a disc or onto your streaming service. So that's a lot of talk. I apologize. The key is that if you use a 4:3 aspect ratio, you're going to get about a 178:1. If you do this on a 16:9 sensor, you're going to get something around 236, 237 aspect ratio. And then with some of the modern cameras that can do 3:2 ratio, I'm going to give you guys the math as I'm doing it on my calculator, just so that you can follow along at home. So remember, a 3:2 aspect ratio sensor is a 1:5:1 aspect ratio. It's 1.5 inches wide for every 1 inch it's tall. Just take 1.5 times 1.33, and you're at a 1.995. So 2x. So if you like Netflix shows, you're in the Netflix aspect ratio when you use open gate and a 133 aspect ratio on like an S9 or an S5 2x.
Yeah. So, math class with Matt Frazer.
Very rudimentary math for me.
So ultimately, for those of you that are getting into this, if you're looking at it because of how inexpensive anamorphic lenses have gotten over the years, and again, this is something Matt and I have talked about for a while, like it's insane how inexpensive it is now for you to get into anamorphic, even from the probably 8 years ago when I joined Panasonic and we were hobbling together, various different pieces to get to anamorphic. we've got a number of these things built into the camera itself that are going to assist you in being able to actually view how that lens is going to, or how that footage is going to look after you bring it back into your software and then de-squeeze it back out to the aspect ratio or based on the squeeze factor that that lens is designed for. So if I'm using this particular lens, you'll see that we have that option to go right in and select 133 for the de-squeeze on this. So it'll look the ratios that Matt described before. If I'm using the full frame, or if I want to, as Matt pointed out on the 3.2 sensors, if I want to get that close to what you see on Netflix, then I can jump up to 2x. But you want to make sure that you're using a lens that is designed for the squeeze ratio that you're showing, or it is extremely close to the number that you see on the display that we have currently. But oh, go ahead.
So Sean, I think one thing to keep in mind here is that when we're talking about like the squeeze ratio,
Yeah.
I'm being very sort of technical in the math and what's happening, because we're talking a lot about delivering a specific aspect ratio. But the reason people want to shoot anamorphic lenses is typically because of the look that they impart on the image. And so the more squeeze you have, there's this guy, Les Zellen, who he's the distributor for Cook anamorphic lenses. And Les has a term I really like. The more squeeze you have, the more anamorphic funkiness you get. And that typically is the case. It also has to do with where the anamorphic elements are. So if you can kind of take that lens and turn it sideways, and you can show everybody kind of the side profile of it. So the ingenue, their zoom optimos, which are beautiful lenses, they put the anamorphic elements at the very back. And so as we disperse those elements through the optic block instead of putting it in the front, we remove some of that anamorphic funkiness. So the ingenues are very clean looking anamorphic lenses. Same with like the ARRI Master Primes. They tend to be very clean looking anamorphic lenses. Whereas the Cooks, which have like an enormous front element, I mean, it's like a roll of Bounty, like, paper towels, just basically bolted to the front of the camera. It's like that big. When you use those, you get a lot of anamorphic funkiness in the image. And so these are things that you want to take into consideration as well. And when we say anamorphic funkiness, let's kind of define what we're talking about, right? So number one, if you want, the J.J. Abrams horizontal lens flares, the more squeeze you have, they tend to get more exaggerated. Number two, when we can give you a 2x squeeze ratio, that means you're going to have twice the angle of view, which means a 100mm lens is a 50mm angle of view. So you can take a 100mm lens, get a 50mm angle of view, and now you're getting 100mm worth of compression, even though you're getting 50mm of angle of view. So we're bringing those backgrounds closer. We're flattening people's facial features more while not sacrificing a wider angle of view. And then the more squeeze we have, the look in the background, we don't usually get circle bokeh. We get like a cat's eye look to it. It's, or some people call it kind of a waterfall look. So the more squeeze we have, the more chaotic that background is, and the more it looks like a waterfall look with oval shaped bokeh. And so that's why, like the 133s, people kind of start there with them because they're inexpensive, they're easy to find. And then they start with those, and then they go, well, I'm not getting the flares I like, or it kind of just looks like a spherical lens that doesn't let me focus very close on things. So then they begin to move up, and where you really start to get that look is with the 1.5s, the 1.6s, the 1.8s, and the 2x squeeze lenses.
Nice. Now you mentioned something within that part of the conversation about open gate, right? And how within our cameras, and this is we're going to shift a little bit away from anamorphic as the main part here, and actually kind of dive into what it is about the ability to record open gate that kind of grew from our push in with this anamorphic stuff, because you were pretty deeply involved with us getting and really kind of evolving what it is that we can do to broaden that particular sensor recording mode into a wider audience. So when you say open gate, for a number of the people that are asking or that are within the chat and may not have an understanding, open gate at its very basic level is recording with a full sensor's height and width, correct?
Yeah, so we use photo sensors. They're not 16:9 aspect ratio. So instead of cropping the top and bottom of that photo image, we're just giving you the full height of the sensor that you can use to capture video.
Yeah. And now with that, is there any relation to resolution or realistically like resolution when it comes to open gate? I'm kind of setting you up on this question.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, if we have an open gate function in a camera, like for example, the S5 II. I don't know why we talk about the cameras like we sell any of them. So sorry, obviously we sell a ton of those. So when you think about that sensor, it's 6,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels, right? And so we're giving you very close to that full resolution. It's like 59, 52 by whatever the removal for the 4,000 would. So you're getting a tremendous amount of resolution to start with, and you're using the entire pixel density of that sensor. When it comes to anamorphic lenses, though, the reason that people like to use that full sensor is because we're squeezing the image, right? And so if you start with a 16:9 aspect ratio, which is a 178:1 or a 185:1 if you're in like DCI. So if you're at 178:1, let's just say that's what we use, and you decide to pair that with a 2x anamorphic lens. Well, your 178 times 2 comes out to like 356:1 aspect ratio. So it's like a little pencil of video on your television image, and then it's all black bar above and below that. And so by going to open gate, if you're starting with like a 1.5:1, 3:2 aspect ratio sensor, you're now getting a 3:1 ratio, so it's much narrower. Or if we're using a 4:3, we're at a it's a 176:1. I'm sorry, 276:1 aspect ratio. And so that's why people like to use that open gate. Plus, then you're getting even shallower depth of field because the diagonal of the sensor is greater. So you're using more surface area, which then gets you shallower depth of field.
Okay. And that open gate functionality has proven to actually be much more flexible than just anamorphic for modern content creation.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because Sean, that there was a lot of conversation at Panasonic for years about. So with the GH4, that was the first camera where we sort of dabbled in this open gate concept. It wasn't quite open gate, but at least at 4:3 ratio. Slightly cropped versus the full sensor. And we tried to convince the factory this needs to be called open gate because that's the term that's used in the industry. And they decided let's just call it anamorphic because that's what people knew. And what's funny is that as we were moving more towards the era of the pandemic, when we saw like this explosion of content creation on TikTok, you're just seeing people crop this thing like crazy, like 4:3. You have like a 16:9 deliverable for YouTube. Then you have your 9:16 that's going up to TikTok, and then people want to do like a 5:4 or a 1:1 on Instagram. And so all of this sort of world of cropping the sensor became something that people needed to be able to do consistently. And at that point, the open gate language made more sense to everybody within Panasonic. And that's why we've really embraced it and moved more towards that terminology. But remember, it always started as an anamorphic feature. That was its original plan for us.
Yeah. Now, with this whole shift to the open gate recording and stuff like that, we've seen like you're saying about like how people are adjusting, cropping, and changing the deliveries of where the stuff is. But I think there's a couple cool things we have within the cameras for people that are maybe not using the open gate function as an anamorphic side of the equation, which obviously we talked about. We haven't forgotten about any of that stuff. But for those that want to use it for social media, for just giving yourself more flexibility in post, what kind of tools do we offer within the cameras for those kinds of use cases?
Well, I think the first one that you actually pointed out to me is we have, well, let's do a second. We'll do that one second. So the first one is our, we have our crop markers, right? So we have the ability to, on the camera, give me 1 second here.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually going to switch to my camera, and so we can talk about them.
I did not want to. Of crop lines. So, Sean, if you want to just go ahead and navigate, to where the should be in the cog menu. Yeah, you're right there. So frame markers. You go to set, and what we have is the ability to choose a whole series of preset options, and then depending on the camera, you may see some more options. Camera sample, but let's say, for instance, we want to do a deliverable to TikTok. So why don't you go to the 9:16 crop lines. And then from there, frame color, we'll leave it green. And then we have the frame masks, which I think are really useful. So we'll turn them. Let's first turn them off, just so we can show people the mask itself. So then just exit. Now you got to turn the frame markers on. And once you do that, boom, we now have the green box right up the middle. And I'm sure most of the people on here already know this. But now you've got your 16:9, your 9:16 TikTok crop reflected on the screen. If you go back in, we can turn on the mask, which when you do that, it'll tint around it. So you're focused on the middle, but you can still see what's being captured on the outer edge. What Sean figured out, I'm going to give him full credit for this, is that we also include a video safety function, which I think is great because it'll pull up 16:9 aspect ratio. And what's called video safe. Here's what video safe means for those of you who don't know. A long time ago, when we had CRT television sets, they would do something called overscanning, which meant that parts of the image that you were recording on the camera would actually be cropped out of the television set. So you would have a range where it's video safe that you wouldn't have to worry would get cropped out. So we keep video safe bars there, which means that now you can show a 9:16 and a 16:9-ish framing on the screen simultaneously, and that's what Sean has just brought up.
Yeah, which actually, for full clarity, that is something that I actually saw from I think one of the it was either on Reddit or Facebook. One of the forums, I think someone posted like, "Hey, this is pretty close," and I was like, "Ooh, we're gonna talk about that. That's so cool."
Yeah, and I think you went to 80%. I think if you go bigger, it actually fills more. Like if you go to 90%, it'll fill more of the screen, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So like go to 95%, and that'll get you real close. So there you go. So that gets you sort of to, and then you would obviously turn the masks off, so that you can actually see what's going on in the 9:16 and 16:9 regions. And now you've got a relatively decent example of what's going on. Of course, Sean's not in open gate right now, I don't think. So
No, not at the moment. But I don't think it'll bug out my switcher.
We'll find out. It's live. Doing it live. So
nice.
Yeah. So
there we
right.
go.
Okay, and so now the problem here is that because of the way that the frame markers work, they try to stick with the aspect ratio that you were using. So now you're going to scale back down. So, and that gets you something close. Now, to be fair, what would be ideal is if you had the ability to, like, I don't know, do a few of these masks simultaneously would be ideal. And so, hopefully at some point we'll be able to implement something like that.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, that I find a little limiting in this is that, you're really center locked right now with what you just did. So there's the ability to custom make your masks as well. So maybe we should just show them that really quick.
Yeah.
Now, this will require you to understand math that only like 5 engineers in the world know. But you have the ability now to go ahead and factor the percentage of crop up and down. So in this case, let's do 100% up and down for um, 16 by 9.
Yeah.
So it'd be 9 by 16. So we would be at, so if we're at a 178 to 1, about 40%. That should be come into 37%, 38%.
Very
That should
specific.
relative at 38, go to 38, sorry. And then you can move it left or right. And so now you can go ahead and position that mask where you would like it for your cropping. And that way, if your plan is to shoot for 16 by 9 and have space for, putting the person's name on like the right side or the left side of them, but you want to still show the TikTok crop to your client, you can do that with this sort of a setup.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's crazy how many different functions and capabilities we have, and I think we're talking about this in obviously on my GH7, and that particular camera has the full open gate, so the 5.8K open gate recording functionality.
Exactly.
And we've actually even kind of evolved this further because like what you mentioned before, talking about social media delivery and users that may not necessarily be bringing this stuff into a higher end production. Those of you that have been following and watched our streams on the S9 may recognize that we have a new recording function within this particular camera called MP4 Lite, or what Matt and I call Open Gate Lite. Within
That's what it should have. That's what it should have been called.
Yes, I agree.
I do not like the name MP4. It should have been. Sometimes there's battles and we lose those battles.
Yeah.
But, yeah. MP4 Lite is what it's called. It is effectively Open Gate.
Yeah, and with that, this kind of ties in. Like we had a question last week. People were saying like, what's the difference between MOV and MP4, right? If you're both looking at 420 and 10-bit, so 420 color and 10-bit for your bit depth. What I think is crazy is that within the S9 we have this new Open Gate Lite functionality, and we're recording in the MP4 wrapper. Now, you and I were talking about this before as kind of a fact check to my answer last week to the one user that was, is there any actual difference between the two particular wrappers if you've got the same color and the same bit depth? And, as we were just saying together, like through that, there really isn't any difference other than the compatibility of where that wrapper can be used on. But I bring this up because when we launched the S9 and we started, talking about Open Gate Lite and being able to record in that Open Gate functionality for social media delivery, that's where being able to actually work with that content on your phone becomes a pretty important, aspect of this. And
Absolutely.
up until,
No, go ahead.
and up until recently, if you wanted to transfer any of the 4K video footage from your Lumix camera, you would have to make sure that, one, you have to go into MP4 to record, which meant that until the S9, there was no way that we could over Wi-Fi transfer an Open Gate piece of video footage to your mobile device.
Right.
So now with this, you're able to take it, bring it into your mobile device, and actually do the cropping, the work there, and you're doing it in a 420 color space, 420 chroma subsampling, and you're still getting your 10-bit footage, so you're able to still even, with the advances in the modern, mobile editing software, you're still able to work with log footage or utilize stuff like the real-time LUT functionality to get that final product the way you want it.
Honestly, Sean, when you think about Open Gate,
Mm-hmm.
6K resolution is a lot of resolution. It's a lot to work with. There's a lot of data there, and the truth is that where most of this stuff is going, when we look at Open Gate Lite or MP4 Lite in this case, it's still a 3840 width image, so it's still 4K. It is a 4K image that you're getting. It's just like 25, 60 tall. So you're
Yeah.
getting a lot more resolution vertically. So you're not losing anything if you're doing a 4K deliverable. When you look at the resolution of a smartphone, when you look at the resolution of your tablet, when you look at the resolution of your television set, you're going to be able to fill that resolution regardless of the crop you're doing, right? Even the newest iPhones are still less resolution than what we have vertically with the MP4 Lite function. So that means that you are maxing out the res on almost every smartphone vertically with what we're doing with that OpenGate Lite function. So for me, there's very little downside to OpenGate Lite for what most people are doing with this for deliverables. It's
Yeah.
just a lighter file that's easier to transfer over to your phone or to other devices. The other thing that I want to talk about with OpenGate Lite though, and something that I I want to touch base on this is that the discussion of a wrapper. I just don't know how many people in here know what the difference is between codec and a wrapper. So I just want to quickly kind of define this for everybody because you'll hear terms like H.265 or H.264. You'll hear IPB and long GOP and all of these terms, and it's a word salad or a gobbledygook that has to sort of be sorted out. What you have to remember is that when we encode a video file, um, it's just video. There's no sound there. So when we encode a video file, that's where your codec is like H.264 or H.265 and how it's going to be compressed. ProRes would be one of those codec options. Then you have your audio codec, and that's your, AAC audio, or it's, PCM, pulse code modulation, 24-bit, 96 kilohertz, whatever the sampling rate is going to be. The wrapper is the container that links the picture and the sound in one file. And then your computer literally decodes them separately as in two different applications typically to decode all that. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that whether it's an MP4 or whether it's in MOV, the codecs are irrelevant because we can use that H.265 codec in MP4 or vice versa. At this point, really, it just comes down to what was the engineer's intent and what they're trying to do with those things, right? So
Yeah.
our engineers, when we look at MP4, they're usually higher efficiency. They tend to be higher compression, less data, easier to transfer over Wi-Fi. That's an engineering decision to use the codecs they use there and to give them more compression to make them easier to transfer. So, if you're filming surfers, on that, you know, in golden hour and you got all that, specular on the ocean, you might not want to use that codec for that because a lot of wave movement, everything else. You may want less compression, but those scenarios don't pop up that often. So I think you'll still be pretty good. As we move into MOV, where MOV really comes into play for us is that um, this was before we started working with ProRes files. That was where our best codecs lived in cameras like the GH4 and the GH5. So that's where we gave you what's called an all intra codec, just a less compressed file. And when we go to the all intra codecs with MOV, that's where we began to give you a less compression, which meant fewer motion artifacts and challenges that you could run into there. Um, Today, the codec we use that gives us the best possible picture is going to be the ProRes codec. And the reason we've done this with Apple ProRes is it's incredibly compatible, right? It's extremely easy to use in every editing software. Um, it's got a reputation, it's got a provenance as an intermediary codec for fast editing, but it delivers beautiful looking images. And our engineers really look at ProRes as uh, not a final format. It's designed to be put into a post-production pipeline. So when you use ProRes on our cameras, there's sort of I consider it a plus. Some people would consider it a negative. There's a heck of a lot more noise in those ProRes files. We're not applying a lot of noise reduction on those files. So, if you're just recording your kid's soccer match and you want to quickly be able to put it on your smartphone and post it to Instagram, ProRes would be the last codec I would ever use for that. That would be a nightmare. Like all the way around, it's not going to be a fun thing to work with.
Wait,
But
Matt, what you're saying is you don't want a 1.9 gigabit file to bring on where a 1 terabyte card only gets you 44 minutes of recording?
oh no, 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 I want ProRes RAW. I want to be able to do a 5.0K ProRes RAW, Wi-Fi delivered to my phone, Um, so I get like what, a 128 gig card is like 3 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah.
yeah, the point being is that ProRes is great for a post workflow. It's designed so that you can use post noise reduction instead of relying on the camera's noise reduction. Because honestly, the noise reduction algorithms that that are in Resolve or in Premiere or in Final Cut, they are infinitely more powerful than what we can put into the camera. And so for people who really are persnickety about that final deliverables image quality, ProRes is always designed for us to be like a digital negative that still has to be processed in post.
Yeah. Now, personally, for you,
Yeah.
which format do you typically like to record in? Because I know, like you were saying, like you're in the middle of a project for the volume photography stuff.
So
Which do
it,
you
it,
typically
it
record?
depends on the deliverable, right? So that's what I'm doing. By the way, you guys would be blown away by the quality of what I'm doing right now for the video. They're the most boring pieces of video I've ever shot in my life. But those are shot in ProRes. Mostly because Neil likes to edit in ProRes. So our coworker edits in ProRes, so I deliver the files to him in ProRes. He prefers to work in them. He prefers to work in log. So they're ProRes, they're log, and the big thing for me is I'm recording in 32-bit float. So the whole reason that we shoot this way is so I have the 32-bit float audio, because I don't want to monitor my audio as we're doing the recording, so it makes it very easy to work with. Um, when I'm doing stuff with like my daughter's track and field, or if I'm doing stuff with like my son's basketball back when he was playing basketball, what I've begun to do just this past season is frankly I use MOV, but I'm using as of today, I'm using MOV with an HLG file
Hmm.
so that when it's delivered to my phone, it's triggering the HDR that's in the phone. And it just makes everything pop. So that's what I've been doing. And then I use a silly little dongle that can put my SD card in so I can pull the files in. Um, Fortunately, um, now with MP4 Lite, that gives me a lot more flexibility to be able to bring those in wirelessly. So my hope is that this coming spring, I'll be working in more of the MP4 Lite format and then delivering that in HLG.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. It's amazing how for the way I think you and I both have pretty different experiences right across the board. You have a lot more experience in the video side of the industry and like with our cameras, and I come from a much farther leaning photographic background with it, and I think what's cool to see over the years is that there's this like kind of like two C's meeting, and it seems to be coming on the back of like MP4 Lite after we released the S9. At least that's the way I'm feeling, because it seems that for the jobs where if I'm recording Lumix Live, or if you're doing training videos, or I'm doing training videos for some of the other sides of our business, those things, yeah, they have their needs. They have the resolutions, the frame rates, the codecs that we're going to work in there because they work best for sitting and working heavily on the computer with it. But the fact that it's so much easier now with like that MP4 Lite being able to just, as you said, shoot an HLG and actually kind of, I think, finally deliver on what being able to record with HLG was intended for originally within our cameras now is really a solid advancement forward. Because what I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize is that while some in the early days of our deployment of HLG within, I think it was the GH5 first, right? That we put HLG in.
It might have been the S1 actually.
Yeah.
It was one of those cameras. I think it was the S1, but regardless, it's a few years ago. No question
Yeah.
about it.
And at that point, I think a number of people didn't really, I think, grasp that. For one, when we put those into the cameras, they're really designed to be more of like a deliverable ready recorded format, right? You're not really designed to bring them into software and edit, because you go into things like the fact that the way the color space is set, the way the luminance ranges are set, HLG in the cameras has traditionally been a shoot it this way and just deliver it, because all the flagging, the tagging that needs for the end display is there, and it can handle it. So to your point, when you put it onto your iPhone, when I put it onto my Galaxy devices, it just triggers and it looks beautiful. Like I said, it pops the colors, the vibrance looks great, the brightness looks great. But
well, and it transfers to social media. It transfers to social media platforms too.
exactly.
And I think that's the thing. So, Sean, you and I were here when we had the first like S1, and we, before we announced, before we announced it, we ran out to a certain dam out in the desert someplace near Las Vegas, and we had actually developed a photo format for HLG photography because there was, again, this is the Wild West. Nobody knew what formats were going to be used, and
Yeah.
we had worked to develop a photo format that can work for this. And so, going from there, where there was like literally no way to view this stuff on like a phone, and you had to like put it on a television set, play it directly from the camera, or bring it in and then do a funky edit to get it into a video format to then work, to where we are today, where I can just shoot it on my camera, just transfer it on my phone, and I can post it to Instagram, and it's going to pop that HDR immediately. Frankly, it's a little embarrassing how fast it's all moved on social media and how slow it's all been to transition for televisions, because it's right now easier for me to share HLG or HDR based footage if I put it onto a social media platform and send it to somebody than if I wanted to try to give it out a file to play on their television at home.
Yeah.
So,
And this actually, so this brings, I think, some of the points. I was going through the camera menu so I can hopefully try to show this to some. There's a comment in the chat actually about hybrid log gamma, and what basically is able to be done with it. And the question is, can you explain how you can edit and color grade the HLG codec itself? And I think ultimately,
it's a great question, actually.
Yeah, it's actually a really good question, because the existing, and I think if I remember right, this is still on limited cameras. That's what I'm trying to find while we're chatting here.
We have a GH7 right there. We can actually show something on the GH7.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's discuss the hybrid log gamma workflow, right?
Yeah.
And what people probably don't realize is that we have 2 hybrid log gamma settings in our cameras. So you'll need to actually go. This is a very impromptu thing we're doing right now. So Sean and I are going to have to find this. Yeah. It should be in the picture settings. Go to the movie. So let's first go to the movie camera mode. Then go to where your picture profiles are. Then let's go to HLG, and then I think scroll down.
It's actually what I was looking for, is to see if it's on the 7 or if this was an S5 Mark II.
Yeah, look on the S5 too. So I apologize. We're having to dig through. We're doing this live, guys. But we have 2 different HLG settings. We have one that limits the gamma, or sorry, the grayscale from to be 64 and 940, and then you can expand it to cover everything from 0 to 1023, which is a full 10-bit file. If you want to edit and color grade HLG and have maximum dynamic range, you want to set the camera for 0 to 1023 in hybrid log gamma, and that'll give you more latitude to work with the file. You'll have a lot less latitude if you're going to be at 64 to 940. And it looks like Sean found exactly what we were looking for, and he's going to pull it up on the menu now, so we can show it on the screen.
All right.
And like we said, we are completely doing this live. That was not a planted question in the menu. That was absolutely something that was impromptu.
So, all right. So there's a couple things before we actually get into that part of the conversation. I just want to talk about how, for one, I'm using the S5 Mark II X right now. So this appears, and this is something Matt and I have to look into about the GH7. But on the S5 Mark II X, and I would assume this is on the S5 Mark II, but we can make a comment on the video after this is published to clarify it. The first thing you're going to have to do is go into your photo style settings, which you'll see here. It's under the cog menu. It's on the first image quality page. Go to photo style settings. Go to show and hide photo styles. And then let me see. Whoop. Uh-oh.
Is that dead battery?
Nah, I think I just moved something here.
Everybody's laughing at us right now in the comments.
My HDMI cable is jacked up. See if I can try to get this. Come on.
And Almanax, I'm going to get to your question about SDR and HDR, which better video platforms can handle them correctly. While Sean's doing that,
Yeah, I'm gonna jump to this screen here. Sorry, y'all. My HDMI cable that I use for my Switch usually doesn't get moved that often, and I think it's got a busted end on it, so I can fix this real quick.
All right. So while you're doing that,
Yeah.
So the question is, what video platforms on the internet actually do an okay job handling and displaying video in SDR and HDR? It's a little disparagement to YouTube and its horrendous handling of it, unless you do them separately. So let me just sort of level set this for a little bit. Horrendous is probably mean-spirited, but let's talk about what's going on. So when you create an HDR image, HDR video, and you upload this to YouTube, you have to understand that you are setting like a peak luminance level of maybe 1,000 nits. And then you're setting like an average of like 400 nits. And regular television is designed to operate from like 0 to 100 nits. So it's a big difference in dynamic range. When you upload that video file to YouTube, YouTube has no idea how you want them to conform midtones when they bring everything from 1,000 nits down to 100 nits. And so oftentimes the midtone range gets darker, and that's probably what you're noticing. There's this guy, he's a friend of Sean and I's. His name is Photo Joseph, and Photo Joseph put together a very complete series on working and editing video for YouTube for HDR. And what you can do with YouTube is that you can embed into the video file a LUT that will correct your 1,000 nits down to 100, putting the midtone point where you want the midtones to be. And so it's a little awkward to do it. I'm not saying it's the best way. The best way, in my opinion, would be you upload both your SDR and your HDR at once. And then when you play it back, YouTube would choose your SDR or your HDR. That's the way it probably should be done. But we can argue this is not the way it works. So what you will do is you'll create what's called an MKV file. And in the MKV file, in the metadata, you'll embed your LUT. And then when you upload the full video file, it'll also upload the LUT. So the way to test this, or the way that Joseph explains to test it, which I think is brilliant, is just run a test edit sometime. Create a black and white LUT so it pulls all the color out. Embed that in the metadata, and when you upload that file, you'll see that when you play on an SDR display, it'll be black and white. When you play on an HDR display, it'll be in full color and full HDR. And then that teaches you the workflow so you know how to do it. And then once you've got that done, you can move forward. But Sean, maybe on this video, we'll put in the comments a link to Joseph's video.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So we'll put that down in the chat. All right. So yes, my HDMI cable has gone off to a better world. Let's put it that way. It's what I get for getting it caught in the mic arm as I moved it and just kind of tore a whole piece of the side of it. So we're going to do it this way. So as we were saying, you're going to look at the camera itself, and on the back here...
Hey, Sean, you might want to get rid of my picture and go full screen for you.
So what you're going to see here is that in the show and hide menu settings, you have an option on the S5 Mark II X for like 2100 HLG full range. But by default, this is turned off within the camera. So what you would end up wanting to do is turn that on so that it now shows in your standard, photo style options when you're going to actually want to change these to get into the idea of I want to work in hybrid log gamma, but I want to do it so that I can edit the footage and not necessarily for a right out of camera deliverable. So that was a whole long way just to show people how to turn something on in the camera, which is my bad. I'm sorry, everybody. But so just like you were saying, Matt, like there is the difference between these two particular modes, right? So the like 2100 HLG, that's the direct deliverable basically designed, and
you can adjust it. I mean,
yeah,
people do. A lot of times some people really liked it, especially on like the S5, I want to say the GH5 2 and some of those cameras. People actually kind of preferred it to Vlog Lite or Vlog L. So
yeah,
some people were just using it as their gradable color profile.
yeah,
There's no rules here. I mean, I say there's no laws. There's rules. There's no laws. I'm not going to come arrest you if you start grading HLG files. Just remember that delivering it in HLG, you're going to see more banding and potential problems when you're adjusting a range limited HLG file. If you
yeah,
can shoot it in full range, you have a lot more latitude to work with. But if you're never going to deliver it in HDR and you're going to just work in HLG as your standard picture profile and then grade from there, yeah, feel free to. There's a lot of people who do it and they love it, and they think it has some of the best looking skin tones. So,
yeah.
um, Bob's your uncle. Do what you want.
Now, all right. So we have only a few minutes left before Matt and I have to go because we have to get back to the rest of our jobs for the day. But I wanna round this out on another color profile that's in the GH7 that we've talked about a very little bit. But I don't think we've had you on here talking about your perspective of this color profile. And that color profile is ARRI LogC3 in the
Okay.
GH7. Um, Knowing, like, obviously you and I were at Cinegear for the announcement of this. We've had a decent amount of experience, I'd say, working with it within our cameras. What does the inclusion of ARRI LogC3 with the GH7 kind of not necessarily mean to you, but what do you see this bringing for the person who may already be working in Vlog and looking at this and saying like, hey, what am I going to gain from working with this versus working in Vlog?
Well, let's first explain what they're not going to gain. There's no meaningful difference in dynamic range between these two. At the end of the day, ARRI and Panasonic have very similar sensibilities when it comes to how log profiles are designed to work and how they're intended to operate. So we're giving you the maximum dynamic range the sensor's capable with Vlog. They're giving you the sensor's maximum capabilities when you're doing LogC3. So there's a couple of like meaningful differences, like ARRI prioritizes bringing the midpoint a little lower. So they're at like 39 IRE from 18 gray. We're at 42 IRE for 18 gray, which means you have a little more highlight latitude in ARRI LogC3. We have a little bit more shadow latitude in Vlog. So again, this is and these are minor, like little differences when we're talking about this. You're like maybe a tenth of a stop more highlight information in ARRI LogC3. It's not going to change your life. So, um, so I want to make sure people understand that if you like Vlog and that's your workflow, that's great.
Yeah.
But what it also is not, this is not a color space transform, which this is driving me insane every single time I see somebody post something on ARRI LogC3 and I hear, well, you can just do a color space transform and you can go ahead and bring it into whatever profile you want. Sure, you are right. We can get you some kind of a close approximation. This is a color matrix readjustment of the camera. This is done at the color matrix during the analog capture of the image before it's digitized. This is as close as we can get to ARRI LogC3 without using ARRI's sensor. It is a very different level of closeness to ARRI than what you're getting by using a color space transform. And so what we view, here's how I view this. Number one, um, look, Lumix shooters are at a bit of a disadvantage when they're doing Hollywood productions. They are. Whether we want to, whether Panasonic wants to admit this or not, it's a fact. People are shooting on Sony and people are shooting on ARRI. Those are the number one and number two cameras used for cinematic production. If you want to deploy a Lumix camera for your production as a C camera or as a crash camera or B camera, you have to talk to Post, and Post is going to tell you, well, we'd really rather, if you're using the Sony Venice, we'd much rather that you use the A7S3. Even though when you actually look at them, they're not even close to the same color space when you shoot them in the associated log profiles. If somebody's shooting an ARRI project, it would be tremendous to be able to take a GH7 with its small lenses and be able to put that in a tissue box hidden someplace and have it work in the color space pipeline of Post without having to do color space transforms and then having to tweak matrix in Post to try to get it as close as you can. This eliminates a lot of arguments you'll have with your colorists and with your post production. Okay. Yeah. Number two, and I think what's probably best for us as an industry is that an ARRI camera is not an inexpensive rental, let alone an inexpensive purchase. For people who want to learn the ARRI workflow, a GH7 is going to be the least expensive way for you to get into entry for this. So if you want to play around with ARRI's look library, ARRI's LUT library, learn the color corrections that make the ARRIs really sing, a GH7 is your great entry point into that. And so it really helps to add value to your Lumix camera when we can partner with somebody like ARRI. It makes your camera more valuable in a post-production workflow. It allows you to be able to be brought on set and pull that camera out and have it used in a impromptu shooting scenario where it can be matched with the primary camera. And I just want to make sure people understand that there's a reason why the S company has gotten to where they have in terms of their use how many films are being shot on that product, and a lot of it is the ecosystem that surrounds it. And we want to make sure that you have that same ecosystem flexibility that those guys get. And frankly, we think that with ARRI's partnership, we're giving you the same flexibility today. Yeah. If you want to be in a broadcast workflow and work with Panasonic cameras on a live production, terrific. We have Vlog in there, and Panasonic makes a whole series of awesome live production cameras and PTZ products. You can go ahead and bring out the 1000 series, the PVS 1000, and get cinema shallow depth of field and work in that Vlog workspace. And every house of worship and live event venue and television production, we go ahead and match those Lumix cameras, throw them on gimbals, and use them in different applications where they're going to be at POV points. We can do all that stuff. But now we can be your cinema workflow as well. And you don't have to make apologies for the fact that you're in a Lumix camera. You have ARRI LogC3.
Yeah. I think that wraps up the whole concept in a really nice bow with it, is that it's about ecosystem, being able to expand your opportunities and know that you have nothing really to worry about if you are bringing it into that particular environment. Now, as someone who does not have any of that side of the world for myself, or any of that experience, I think it's really cool having just how straightforward that workflow is. I mean, when you walked me through how ARRI's workflow is, the log-to-log workflow, and then being able to then at the end of the project determine this is my HDR, this is my SDR, it has made to the point now where, like, if I'm shooting anything for our like internal training materials or staff training materials, stuff like that, I'm using my GH7, I'm shooting an ARRI LogC3, but I'm actually using the trick that you and I were talking about at Cinegear when we were tearing down. I'm actually shooting with real-time LUT and ARRI LogC3 and having their final LUTs already embedded onto that footage and just trying to get it as correct as I can in camera for that final delivery. And it's such a cool way because, well, yes, you can do some of this stuff with Vlog as well, because you can set Vlog and use real-time LUT and use Vlog-based conversion LUTs for that as well. But the fact that ARRI has, what, 80 plus LUTs available?
Well, and I think for somebody who's not committed to a log workflow yet, especially like a first time log user, right? Somebody who's been shooting video for a while, they've wanted to venture into log. I love Vlog, and I'm sure everybody on here is going to defend Vlog till the dying day because it's great. It really is. It's a fantastic profile. We don't have anywhere near the LUTs and looks that are available for ARRI. So for somebody who's not already committed to a workflow, the first time that you see how awesome those ARRI looks look when you can bring them in, and just how polished all of this stuff is, and how much support there is in like Premiere with just being able to naturally select LUTs without having to load things in. They have film simulations already pre-built in for ARRI with the brand of film stock that is designed to replicate. None of that stuff exists now for Vlog. So for people who want to shoot log and be more creative with it, especially if they've never been committed to Vlog, it just makes sense to try ARRI LogC3 because it's going to be an easier road to hoe to get your looks faster. Sorry, guys, and that's we work for Panasonic.
Yeah.
First, when we started working with them, we were like, oh, they're really nice. So, kind of been our reaction to it.
So out of all of that, I have one takeaway that I want to share. You actually spoke very highly of Premiere Pro.
Well, no. A broken clock is right twice a day, right, Sean? So
ouch. All right. Well,
on that note,
yeah. Thank you, Matt, for jumping on for the stream today. I always have a lot of fun when you're on here because, you know, as everyone knows, you know, we typically hate each other outside of this, but you know, we can pull it together and put the face on for you know, everyone that's here watching. So it's a good exercise in keeping a straight face. But all jokes aside, seriously, thank you so much for jumping in. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to, you know, maybe have you back again, maybe sooner than it had been since the last time you were on. But obviously, you know, you and I have a lot of other things going on throughout the company. But yeah, anyone that had a question that, you know, we didn't kind of tangentially answer or kind of fully get through, if you have a question for Matt that you want to ask, and, you know, maybe something that we can address in a future stream, drop those questions in the comments after the video goes live, because Matt and I can see them, and then, you know, we can, you know, formulate, you know, the answers to them. And if it's a answer that I can give on a stream when Matt's not able to be here, we'll be able to get you some updated info there. But yeah, otherwise, thanks again, Matt. I always love having you on the stream and just kind of chatting with you. So,
well, thanks for having me, Sean. Always happy to be here. Always great to talk to you, and we will talk again soon.
Yeah, probably in about 15 minutes in our next meeting.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, thanks everybody again for tuning in. We will be actually, we won't be live next Thursday at 2 p.m. I will be recording the broadcast for that. I will actually be traveling out to San Diego for TwitchCon. I'm going to be there at the SanDisk booth, actually, with the S9. So if you are based in San Diego and you're going to be attending TwitchCon, stop by the SanDisk booth. I'll be there. So for that week, it'll be a recorded stream. The following week, I am also out. I have a big Matt and I have a big training event that we're doing. So that will also be a recorded stream because we're not going to have time on that Thursday to be able to do an actual live stream. But then the following week, when we get into October, we will be actually back live here on YouTube. It's been a crazy year of in and out of recorded sessions versus actually live. But I thank you all for sticking with us and joining these streams and getting really good questions in on the chat. So other than that, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. I hope you have a great weekend. Get out there, create some cool stuff. If you like this conversation, hit the like button, subscribe if you don't already. As I said before, if you have questions, make sure to drop them in the comment section after this video so that we can get back to them later. Other than that, see you later, everybody.